Everybody. It is a absolutely stunning Sabbath morning in Texarkana, Northeast Texas, Southwest Arkansas area. And we have been observing the creation doing its peaceful, orderly, wise thing all morning. I've been sitting watching the crows, the jays and the sparrows, and just think about, meditate on how the sparrow deals with the crow and the jay, and who wins that battle in the ultimate realm, and who belongs in the ecosystem, and who's just an interloper visiting for a while, yet performing an essential function. So we've been watching creation do its thing, teach its lessons, and now we pass through the veil. This is the second veil of Sabbath. This is the morning, the Saturday morning, the Shabbat morning. The first veil of the Sabbath, which leads us into the antechambers of the King, is Friday evening, beginning at sundown. And so we've come into the antechambers. We've been welcomed into the antechambers of the King Friday evening and through the night. And now we step into the holy place, the holy of place of communion. And hopefully you can hear or sense or feel in your spirit, at least, the voices of the great cloud of witnesses saying, "Good Sabbath, precious child of the King." I welcome everyone who's here at the Biblical Lifestyle Center with me this morning, and it's good to see everybody and your smiling faces. And I also welcome all of you from throughout the nations, the states of the Union, throughout the provinces of Canada and Mexico, throughout the continents across the world. Welcome. You are welcome here, and good Sabbath, precious child of the King. We are doing what we normally do as we pass through this veil of the second veil of Sabbath. And we really begin to focus on the words that the Creator has left upon the earth. The wise, inspiring, empowering words with which He left us an encouragement, a blessing. And so we began to transition to phase two. We've been in phase one as we go through the Torah every year, 52 weeks of the year we go through the Torah. And we are at week number 13 now of the creation cycle. So week 13 is where we transition from what most people in the West know as the book of Genesis to what most people in the West know as the book of Exodus. So we are in shifting phases. There are a total of 5 phases of the grand plan of the redemption for mankind, a species, bloodline by bloodline, and household by household, and for the restoration of creation to its original intended state of beauty and fruitfulness and shalom and harmonious interaction. We're in phase 2 of 5 phases that are spelled out for us in Torah. This begins phase 2. We are just at the entry point. We are just entering into this second phase. It's a critical, important phase. It's a beautiful phase, but it starts out very hard. It starts out in a situation where the world seems dark and out of control, actually in control of the crows and the jays. And the crows and the jays are making a lot of noise, and they squawk, and they intimidate, and they threaten, and they strut around like they own the place. And the sparrows, know you not that the Holy One cares for his sparrows. The sparrows wait patiently, trusting the creative plan. And as soon as the crows and the jays have had their day and have made their squawk, it's amazing how strangely who wins the battle. Who comes out? The sparrows rise up as a unity together. And they do something they're capable of doing that the jays and the crows cannot. They cannot join together. They cannot be unified. They cannot act together. They are always at war with one another as well as everyone else. And so what happens is the sparrows are swift and adept, and they move together, and they drive the crows and the jays from the ecosystem. They don't do it out of vengeance. They don't do it out of anger. They don't do it out of self-righteous pride. They do it for the sake of the ecosystem and for the sake of their children, the young, and their households. Well, this is the season when we begin to learn how to fly like a sparrow, how to look at the world through sparrow eyes, as opposed to trying to play the game of the crow and the jay. I think we have tended to feel like we were crows and jays, and we could squawk like the best of them, and we could make all the noise, and we could do all the intimidation, and we could strut our feathers and show our pride and our power. And that's not what we're created. Phase 2 is to train us in disciplines and in coordinating with our actual purpose and our meaning. So welcome to phase 2 of the grand plan. Welcome to the Creator's discipline. I call this the Parsha. We begin with the 13th Parsha, Shemot. It's usually translated as names in the Western language. It means a lot more than that, but I'll just tell you it's usually translated that way. But we start with this Parsha, and we enter in this whole book that is known by the West as Exodus. It's also known as Shemot by the Hebrews. And this is the Parsha, the beginning Parsha of this new phase 2. And it's awakening a nation. Not a collective group of Lone Rangers, not a group of loose cannons, not a group of individuals seeking out their own pathway, not a group of every man doing what's right in his own eyes. A nation. Awakening a nation to its collective identity, to its cooperative mission, to its shared destiny, and to its persona as Am B'nai Israel, the nation of the children, the sons of Israel. This is what we are into, where we are. We will be reading Exodus chapter 1, verse 1, beginning at the very beginning of this book. Exodus chapter 1, verse 1, all the way through chapter 6, verse 1. Corresponding readings from the prophets include Isaiah 27, 6 through 13, and Jeremiah 1, 1 through 2, 3. I commit those to you for your own study later in the Sabbath if you haven't studied them already. The corresponding readings from the Acts of the Apostles, Acts chapter 7, verse 30 through chapter 8, verse 4. And this is the summation part of Stephen's discussion of this very Parsha and what happened in this Parsha and how the nation arose and what it did. And what happens when the nation chooses to be like a crow or a jay or a buzzard or a vulture, as opposed to being the sparrow it was created to be. All right, we are. Do you remember where we left off? I always like to encourage us to stay in context. All of Torah is a beautiful tapestry. It's written sequence upon sequence. And so to forget where we were is to not understand where we are, and certainly not to be able to understand where we're going. So we have to learn where we are. Context, context, context. First rule of hermeneutics, first rule of any way of spiritual life is, where are we? How did we get here? And what is the last thing we knew? So the final words of the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshit, as it's called in Hebrew, gave us some hints of what was to come. Those final words of Sefer Bereshit, of book of Genesis, that we were left with, that form our context for what we're going to talk about in phase 2 of this operation. In Hebrew it says, Vayamot Yosef ben Me'ah va'aser shanim. And Joseph died at the age of 110 years. Va'achantu otu, and they embalmed him. Vayisem be'aron be'mitzrayim. And he was in a box in Egypt. So we have Joseph dying. We have the story that goes before Joseph dying, how he got to Mitzrayim, to Egypt in the first place, to start with. And we have this strange phenomenon of Joseph's bones, Joseph's being, Joseph's lifeblood, Joseph's calling, Joseph's messianic imagery in a box in Egypt. It's not going to stay in the box forever. There will be an arising. There will be a coming forth. That's what the second book of Exodus begins to tell us. And the second book of Torah, rather, begins to tell us. So as we start this whole season that we'll be entering into, and it's basically 11 weeks. 11 weeks of this phase 2 of the creative plan. And this 11 weeks will take us through many scenes, many experiences, many teachings, many disciplines, but basically we are on notice that the story of Joseph and his brothers has not all been told. Something remains to be seen. Something remains to be undone. something cries out, there is more to this story than meets the eye. What we are seeing on the surface is not how this story ends. And I encourage you with regard to everything going on in your life and in your world and in your political, economic, social structure that you live in, what you are seeing is not the way this all ends. All you're seeing is a box of bones in a land we may think of as Egypt. So, the story of Joseph and his brothers has not all been told. There is more to come. The bones are in the box, but they are awaiting transport. They are awaiting transition. So on my next slide that I have prepared for my family, and this is really for my family, I do these PowerPoints, but it says, it's got a picture of a road ahead with nothing else on the road, just it looks like there's a bit of a desert scape ahead, and then in the far, far distance, there's a mountain rises up from the desert. So there's a road that leads through the desert to this, somehow, this shady, great mountain out there. And the caption I put underneath it says, "What's that up ahead?" And so that's where we are as we enter this season of transition, this season of the second phase of the plan. What's that up ahead? There's a shadow of a great mountain rising up out of the desert. You know which one I'm talking about now, if you understand the book of Exodus. This is that mountain called Sinai. And the reason I don't particularly enjoy or like calling this book Exodus is because it's really not about Exodus. That's only the first part, the first 12 chapters. And that's only to get us to the point where we see the mountain looming in the distance. And we feel drawn to that mountain. And we will be drawn to that mountain for the rest of our lives and for the rest of time on earth. That mountain becomes the center point, the center of focus, the center of gravity of our life. That mountain is Sinai. And I know that sounds crazy to you in many situations with your religious context. That mountain is the center point of everything. And there is another mountain we will see. We've already seen it once. We'll see it again, Mount Moriah, and we'll see how these two mountains correspond one to another. They are like sisters. This is the Parsha and the season of enlarging our vision. The natural eye only sees so much, particularly when it is directed and utilized and manipulated by outside sources. In our world, media sources, social groups, political organizations and movements. These sources tend to restrict our vision, where all we can see is a small portion of what's happening. And we're locked in vision on that. This is what a video camera will do to you. You're looking at me. Would you believe there are families in this room that you cannot see? There are lives important to the kingdom that are taking place, right? But all you see is what this camera shows you. There are many, many more things happening in this world than our eyes are able, based upon the teaching and the training and the discipline we're being forced on by outside sources, than we can see. And we're about this season, this time, is about learning to awaken to see beyond what the world is trying to show us. What the media, what the political realm, what the economic realm, what the technological realm is trying to show you. There is so much more going on. So I call it the season of enlarging our vision, of deepening our awe, our reverence, and our personal connection to the Holy One, the creator of heavens and the earth, the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, the Redeemer of Israel, the source of all of our hope, the source of all of our light. Here's our season to disconnect from what is being broadcast to us by the world and to reconnect with the empowerment that is coming from our Creator Himself. And in that context, we are taking a great step. Phase 2 of the plan involves us taking a great leap forward, transitioning from my Creator, my God, Abraham's covenant partner, Abraham's covenant partner, perspective. That's what Genesis provides to us. It is a necessary beginning, that He's my God. He's my Father's God. He is my covenant partner. Mine. Singular. Possessive. Mine. Lone Ranger stuff. Loose cannon stuff. Mine. We're transitioning from that. That was the first step. We have to first understand He is ours. But He is a lot more than ours. And so the transition goes from my Creator, my God, my covenant partner, Abraham's covenant partner, to what Yeshua taught us to pray. Our Father. Avinu. Not just my Father, not just my God, not just my covenant partner, our covenant partner, the covenant partner of the swallow, the king, the swallow community, the sparrow community. This is us. And He says to go to our Father, to our Redeemer. Not just my Redeemer. He's our Redeemer. He is our shepherd, provider, guide, protector. He is our great nation's reigning king forever. He is not mine. He is ours. And as we join ourselves to Him, He will join us with each other. If we try to join ourselves to each other without first being joined to Him, it will be a useless, matter of fact, self-destructive enterprise. But as we let Him lead us, as we let Him connect Him to us and us to Him, then we will find we can legitimately connect with other people, with others who are called to be children of the Most High. So the question becomes, okay, if this is where we are, if we're taking a transition mode, we're going into this transition mode, and maybe our vision up to this point has been limited. Maybe we have been blind. Maybe we are trying to be blind leaders of the blind. We're trying to lead the world, and we don't have a vision for our king, for our shepherd. We don't have a vision for the collective. We don't have a vision for the community. We don't have a vision for more than our self-interest and our attitude and our belief system and our priorities. And if we don't have more than that, then we weren't ready. We have not been anywhere close to ready to have any voice or impact in the world besides minimal at the time. But He wants to raise us up in a different realm. So who are we now, and what does He want us to become? And what is the process by which we will have to make those steps and those strides to go from where we are right now, and how we think and how we don't think and how we see and how we don't see, to what He has designed for us. This is the second book of Torah, the second phase of the plan. And we're going to see basically 3 acts of a great play. I like to think in terms of the great drama of the kingdom. The kingdom of heaven, the Holy One knows that men tend to respond better when they see something acted out, when they see drama. They respond to the characters, they respond to the action, they feel like part of the play. Hollywood has figured this out, and so they emulate. They emulate what the Holy One has done. The Holy One has set up His book, His Torah. They've set up as if it was a great play with many acts. And we are to connect with the characters, but we are actually to connect with the action and understand this is our story, not their story. And so He is the great storyteller, the great playwright, and He introduces us to these books of Torah. Each one is a big production. And the production is real. It actually happened. It's legitimate. But it is more than that, or it wouldn't be in this book. It is the play through which we are to connect. And so there are 3 acts in this separate part of the movement. And the first act is the saga of slavery sequences. What it's like. Do you know you're in slavery? You don't even know you're in bondage. You don't even know how much bondage you're under. You don't know how you have blended in and become addicted to and attached to the secular world around you. You don't know how controlled you are by it. Your thinking is controlled by it, and you don't even know it. Your vocabulary is controlled by it, and you don't even know it. Your behavior and your reactions to events and stimuli, your reactions to insult or offense, your reactions to things that go on that you don't understand or agree with, those things are pre-programmed by your society. You're in bondage. This is the slavery sequences, Act 1. Understanding how slavery works, how the enslavement of the mind and the soul and the spirit work, and how then, if that's who we are now, how we transition out of that mode. How we begin to grow out of that slavery bondage mode into the nation mode, the great nation that was promised to Abraham seed many years ago, many decades ago, many centuries ago. Has always been the plan, the great nation. How do we transition from a group of people that are in bondage and that don't even know they're in bondage to a people who actually moves at the bequest and at the direction and in time and sequence and proportion to the movement of the Creator himself? Act 2, which will take a while, 3 weeks down the road, the fourth week down the road, we'll begin with Act 2 of this big, great drama. And Act 2 will be on the shifting sands between Egypt as we're coming out of Egypt. I call it the first desert narrative. Act 2 is the first desert narrative. We go to places like the Sea of Reeds. We'll go to places, we'll deal with things at the Sea of Reeds. We'll learn how to respond and let heaven touch earth and have praise and adoration and rejoicing on earth as it is in heaven at the Sea of Reeds. But that will just be part of the beginning. That won't be the goal. That's just the beginning, to learn how to coordinate with heaven and earth and begin to do on earth what is being done in heaven. We'll see that at the Sea of Reeds. Oh, we see Marah. We see the place of bitter waters. And we see the tree of life. And we'll see the attack of Amalek. We see how our enemies work and how that we are to adapt. We will learn to adapt kingdom covenant protocols, rules of engagement of the kingdom, as opposed to just responding in the flesh to the attacks of the adversary. I'm not going to go in detail about that. That's weeks ahead. That's phase 2. And this is all taking us from the place where we start as we leave Egypt and leave the bondage. We have to process through and learn the lessons of the first desert. And then Act 3 is the rest of the book. Basically chapters 19 through the 40, the end of the book. And this, the longest, biggest part of this book is about what happened at Sinai, what happened at the mountain, and how he began to take us from what we were, a bunch of slaves, to a kingdom and a nation in that process. So, what is the role of this book, of Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, in the greater scheme? We're not just reading some literature and War and Peace, or some novel by one of the modern novelists. We are reading the wisdom scroll of the Creator of the universe, His plan, His history, His outline of history, and His instructions. And so what is this role of this particular, the second book, the second Sefer, the second part of the scroll in the overall? First of all, I've already referred to it somewhat. The first is to introduce us to the collective aspect of our calling. And I will be honest, to reintroduce us to it. We need to have it reintroduced every year, because every year we tend to get off being solos. We tend to be focusing upon ourselves and our rights and our desires and our plans and our sense of what's fair and what's not fair and what's moral and what's immoral and who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side, what's right in our own eyes. We tend to do this fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil every year. So every year, this second part of the book, part of the story, part of the scroll, is to reintroduce us to the grand collective covenant calling, the communal aspect of the calling. This is so much bigger, you see, than any individual. It is so much bigger than any family or household. It is so much bigger than any ethnicity or nation or culture. This is the plan of the Creator of the universe for the creation that He designed. So part 1 is to reintroduce us to the communal aspect of our calling. We will find that we can do things together. Do you know what we're going to do before this book's over? A mixed multitude of ethnicities is going to team up with a bunch of refugees from Egypt, from former slaves, and they're going to build a habitation for the Creator of the universe. And the Creator is going to dwell with them. He's going to dwell in them and among them. He is going to come. The Creator is going to connect with a people, as a covenant community. Well, this is important. Part 2, the second phase of this book, what this book is going to teach us, and I encourage you to join with it and enjoy it, is defining our shared need for and our shared experiences of deliverance. Until you realize you need deliverance, until you realize your life and your personality and your home and your family is not the best it can be by any stretch of the imagination, but is in fact being oppressed and repressed and suppressed and depressed and stressed by your world around you and by its worldviews and its mindsets and its power structures and its power brokers, until you realize that and you realize how deeply, badly you need deliverance, you will not seek it. You will not ask for it. You will not think you want it. You will think you're okay just believing a few good things. And you're being better than a bunch of other people, more intelligent, more moral, more sophisticated, whatever you think you are, until you realize your need for deliverance. So this book is designed to reawaken in us, remind us of the need of every human being, every household, every bloodline, every ethnicity, for a powerful redemption from heaven, for a restoration, for a deliverance, and for a deliverer. Not a human like us. A deliverer that is glorious and majestic in his splendor, that is more than just my father's God, that is more than just the God of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov of the days past, more than just the covenant partner that Abraham met in Padan Aram. No, this is our Father, our covenant partner, our King, our lover, our Redeemer. So we need to have our shared need for and our shared experiences of deliverance. There's two phases of this process that are going to be mentioned in the book. The first one is the external, need for deliverance, to realize our need for deliverance from the external forces, from the Egypt, from the Pharaoh, from the worldview, the craziness of the shadow of the pyramid, the shadow of the big buildings, the shadow of what men do, the shadow of sports and economics, the shadow of entertainment, the shadow of politics, the shadow of government, the shadow of all that men can build. We are in that realm, and this is the external part of it. The first part is to turn ourselves loose from, to disentangle from, and to be delivered from the external, and then sense that we belong in these external things, and we are committed to them, and they're part of us, and we're supposed to reform them in some way. No. And the second part of it is internal. Once we get out of Egypt, once there's no Pharaoh, once the Sea of Reeds takes place and there's no Pharaoh chasing us, that's when the real work begins. The external, you see, is not our biggest problem. There's things that the oppression, the things that of bondage that were put on us by external forces are a critical thing we must release ourselves from, but that's not the real matter. The real matter is the internal. It's what's wrong with us. It's what got us into Egypt in the first place and made us associate so closely with it and feel so connected to it and get so comfortable in it. It is what's inside of us that must be redeemed. And when we find that inside of us, and not just us, but everyone around us, there is this deep, deep, deep need, craving, hungering for a deliverance, for a restoration, for a bringing us out. Last week we talked about Shiloh. And most English speakers I know call it Shiloh. Shiloh. And so we said, what is Shiloh? Who is Shiloh? It's a good question because it's both. Shiloh, and I gave you the Hebrew interpretation. It's kind of from Shalah, same word that we're going to get shalom out of. But it is the rest, the peaceful rest that you desire. The peaceful rest that you desire. That's Shiloh. And Shiloh will come. Until Shiloh comes, we are somewhere else. Now, this idea of connecting with this deliverer that brings Shiloh, the peaceful rest that we desire, that's where we're getting to. Are you hungry for the Messiah? Are we hungry for the deliverance? Or do we just want a tweaking of the political structure? Are we hungry for a deliverance external from the external forces? But even more so, are we hungry Are we craving? Are we desperately in calling out for a deliverance from the internal sources that cause us to be under the oppression in the first place? That's our challenge of Book 2. That's the second aspect of that challenge. The third aspect of the challenge is one I don't know if I can speak without getting giddy about. There's four. I'm going to give you four basic essences of this book, 4 reasons this book is in the Scripture, 4 reasons that this book is unique among the books of Torah. This book introduces the radiant, ruddy, and passionate courtier, bridegroom, covenant keeper, kinsman redeemer, deliverer, king, Ishi, our husband, aspects of the divine persona. The one who spoke Yehior into the world. The one who called Abraham, Lech Lecha, to him, Lech Lecha, go out for yourself. The one who said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm doing? Because he will teach his children and his household following to follow the ways of Adonai, to walk, to do righteousness and do justice. We're going to go from being just the creator, the Elohim, even the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh aspect of his persona, to something far more glorious. We've always had awe, but now we will begin to feel love. We will begin to feel passion, hunger for his presence, hunger for his company, his companionship, hunger to honor him and to serve him, not just because he's our creator or our God, because he is the most radiant, ruddy, beautiful, wonderful being in the universe. And our hearts are astir. Our hearts are awakened with passion, with love for him. This is the book in which this takes place. This transition takes place. And it takes place at a mountain called Sinai. And it begins, this is just the pattern, the protocol for how to go from being just a believer in God to being a passionate lover of the Most High, who loves him and is loved by him at deep, intimate levels that change everything and redeem us from those things that cause us to go into bondage in the first place. Well, that's the third aspect of this book of Shemot, book of Exodus. And the fourth one is to acquaint us with and actually acclimate us to the constant abiding presence of this great courtier, bridegroom, redeemer, deliverer, king. Abraham knew him coming and going. He had visitations. Yitzhak had a couple of visitations, and Yaakov had a dream and a visitation, and Joseph had a bunch of dreams. Occasionally, from time to time, they would interact, and their life would be affected and changed. We'd have a few experiences we could tell stories about and tell our children about. Oh, but one thing we have not yet seen, but we are about to see, that is in our near future, that is on our near horizon, and that is to experience the constant, abiding presence of the most beautiful character in the universe, the most beautiful person, the most beautiful voice, and to have our hearts continually flowing in unity with him. You know, I saw something this week, and I'll interrupt my little discussion just for a story. I was in the presence of an Iraqi war veteran who had been involved in an incident and had IED, explosive device, had gone off, and he had lost his legs. And he had been fitted many years ago now with a prosthesis below both legs, above the knee. And so as he walked, there were just the prosthesis is all you saw below to his shoes. And conversations going on, and that's fine. And, you know, he stands, and that's amazing to me that he can stand. That he has the ability to stand there and have a conversation with me. At my level, eye level, we have what amazing honor. And then as he begins to leave, he turns and walks. And as he walks away, he is able to walk, though he has no leg below his thigh, mid-thigh. And he walks in coordination. It might not be as pretty as you and I walk, maybe prettier than I walk. But And I'm thinking to myself, how does the brain, how do the nerve impulses, how does the nervous system coordinate so well with a foreign object? A piece of metal or steel or plexiglass or whatever that is. How does that happen? He says, this is what, and the Holy One speaks to me as I sense in my spirit. He says, that's what happens with you. You're just a prosthesis. I connect you with me, and then we begin to walk together, and I train you to take my impulses and move in my impulses, but you have to be in my constant presence for that to take place. A couple of interactions here and there, a couple of experiences here and there, a prayer here and there, a deliverance here and there, that's not going to do it. You need to learn to coordinate day by day, moment by moment, in my presence. And that's where we're going in this book. This book is to teach us how to learn to acclimate to and deal with the presence of the Almighty God day by day, in and out. We become the temple. If we're building a tabernacle at Sinai, we're actually becoming the tabernacle at Sinai. And even whenever the Holy One introduces the whole process in chapter 25 of this book, how he's going to introduce it in English, it says, I'm going to dwell with them, that I may build the tabernacle, that I may dwell with them. But in Hebrew, it says, that I may dwell in them, that I may dwell in them, that I may become their brain, their nerve center, and connect them to them so they can follow and do what I say. Now, he's learning to prepare us to have this constant interaction with him. Now, I'll leave it to you at this particular stage to see what would be necessary, what protocols, what transformations in you would be necessary to prepare you to have a constant abiding presence. I will remind you, that's what Yeshua said, right? That if I abide in you, and you in me, then, I think people forget the if, the great if, the wow if. If we will abide in him and he will abide in us, then we will see all the wonderful things that are taking place in John chapter 14. So with this process of learning how to abide and how to be abided in and how to abide with and how to move with him, this is what we have to step forward in. And are we ready for this? What would we have to give up? What attitudes will we need to shed? What ways of talking and expressing our opinion? What independence, what self-righteous independence will we need to let go of if we're going to connect as the prosthesis to the brain center that is the creator of the universe? Well, this is about preparing us to responsibly engage him through throne room appropriate protocols. We're going to see the book 3 is about really laying out. Leviticus is about laying out proper, appropriate throne room protocols. When he dwells with you, when you're in constant abiding presence, this is not a book of laws. This is a book of how to relate and have the creator of the universe dwell in you. And how that happen with other people at the same time. And how to make a community and a nation function in a way that's appropriate to the throne room that we live in. And then to learn his ways and his disciplines and become useful, sanctified, glorious vessels of his glory. That is what this book is about. It's a great undertaking. I told you it's a great story. The great adventure. Phase 2 of the grand redemptive plan. That just gets us to the place where we're ready to begin to function with the community. That'll be what the book is. There's landmark events. What are the landmark events of this book? First one is the awakening of the need and the outcry for a deliverer. I told you about that. This is critical. This is the first step of this book. If we're going to get anywhere in this book, we must come to a place of saying we need deliverance and we need a deliverer. Now, I could care, well, I don't want to say I could care less. I'm not talking about some deliverance theory. I'm not talking about some deliverance theology. I'm not talking about some deliverance mindset that you've got about what deliverance is based on whether you're in or out of charismatic Christianity. I'm talking about real Yasha. The Hebrew word is Yasha. That's where we get Yeshua from. I know I'm going to get some flack for that because other people don't believe that. Yasha is a Hebrew word which means, we call it deliver, but it means to take you from where you are in a narrow, constricted place, under great pressure and oppression and stress from outside, and to take you out of that and put you in an open space where you can prosper and flourish. Yasha. So I'm not talking about whether you cast out a demon. I'm talking about something much more significant when I say deliverance. The deliverance form I'm talking about is to take you from the bondage you're in to the powerful, influential, transformational freedom that he has called you to be in. So the first landmark will be the awakening of this need for this deliverer. The second part will be the disentanglement process. You don't just suddenly get free of Egypt. It's all in you. It's all up in you. It's all over you. You've got a whole stronghold. And the nation and people have this great stronghold of Egypt. It's got layer upon layer of lies, and layer upon layer of nonsense, and layer upon layer of pride and arrogance, and layers upon layers of PTSD, fear and anxiety and worry, and layers upon layers of this. We have to disentangle ourselves thread by thread. That's why there's 10 plagues, and that's just the beginning. He said, I'm going to take layer by layer, I'm going to take this off of you, but you're going to have to learn to disentangle. Every layer, as I take off, step into your freedom. Step into your increased freedom, realizing that it's one step at a time. We're taking one step at a time. But I know what you are bound by, and I will take them off one by one. That's his message to you. But this disentanglement is a process, and it requires our participation. It requires us to collaborate and cooperate with him to do that. The third landmark event is going to be the Sea of Reeds experience. What a lesson. That we can actually yield ourselves after a great deliverance is effectuated. We can actually yield our members, our tongues, our minds, our eyes, our hearts to actually resonate on earth what is being sung in heaven. The Song of the Sea. The Song of the Sea is the great picture of when human beings actually yielded to the sounds of heaven. And they didn't make up songs and sing them off of an overhead projector. And they didn't try to pick a key and a chord structure. And they didn't try to come up with some sort of script that you could follow and people would go along with, and it would help the flesh. This was whenever you opened your mouth and let the Holy One and his host fill it with praise. That's what we're going to see at the Song of the Sea and the Sea of Reeds. And then the war with Amalek will be the next landmark event. And then the great betrothal of the king, the courtier, of the bridegroom to his nation, his people, individually and collectively at Mount Sinai. I shudder and smile when I hear people call this the giving of the law. It's the giving of the hand. It's taking the hand of the bride and proclaiming over her, this is how I see you, my love. This is who you are. This is who I'm making you. You are not that yet, but you will be. You are my betrothed, and I will do what's necessary to prepare you for this bridal transition. It's not a bunch of rules to follow, laws to commit. It is a matter of our identity, who we really are. You are not idolaters. You are not adulterers. You are not liars. That's not who you are. That's who your society has made you. That's who the oppression of the external forces have turned you into. You're not thieves. You're not coveters. You're not those things. But you have to see that I see you in a different way. And so he will proclaim over her in this great Sinaitic betrothal with his beautiful eyes looking at you, gazing at you, his hand touching your hand, calling you into your destiny, saying, oh, this is who you are. And that's not who you are. So we'll see that betrothal theophany at Sinai. And then we will see Moshe getting the download, the blueprint, for the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the dwelling place, the replica of the heavenly throne room that we are to build out of material things upon the earth. He will get that imagery. We will be told what it looks like. We will be told how it functions. We will be told who functions in it and under what situation they function. And then we will see us, our own people. We will see ourselves and erect the antithesis of that. We need to know the antithesis before we can ever actually build the vision the Holy One has. What is the antithesis of the tabernacle? What is the antithesis of dwelling, the abiding presence of the Holy One, and responding, being responsive to Him? It is the golden calf. It is, we build our own system. We declare our own special days. This is a day, we'll declare this a festival unto Yahweh, unto the Jehovah. To make our own day, to make our own time, to build our own, build a religion around images, around symbols, around sacraments, around noise and fleshly appealing appetizers to make things pleasant and for human beings to come into, to do. What's the phrase everybody uses these days? Or about 10 years ago they started using it, I guess. Seeker-friendly stuff. To make it seeker-friendly in this process. This is what the antithesis of the tabernacle imagery. The antithesis of hosting the divine presence and flowing in response to Him is the religious systems. And here's what we'll find out. Most of us are living in the golden calf. Most of us are in the golden calf system. The highest forms of religion that men know are the golden calf system. But we're called to something much more beautiful than that. We're not called to condemn. We're not called to hate. We're not called to throw stones at. We're not called to cast down. But we are called to give a model and a picture of something more beautiful than those golden calf systems can ever generate or operate in. So we have the introduction of the Mishkan replica. We have the experimentation of the people with the antithesis, so we learn what the stench of it looks like and what the misery of it and the destruction of it comes with it is. And then we have finally choosing the Mishkan model for our own. Working together with our friends and neighbors and countrymen and strangers, if necessary, to actually make a place for the Holy One to rest and constantly abide, to make a place for Him to abide with us. That is the landmark events. I want to get into the scripture. Let's read. If you would stand with me, we're going to read the first few verses, actually about the first chapter. So we'll be standing for a while, but it won't be that long. It's a short chapter. And as we read, before we read, I will actually do what I normally do, which is to, it's my personal preference and my personal practice. I don't say you have to do this. This is not a sacrament. This is merely a way in which I can get my mind acclimated to where I'm going. So I pray out of Psalm 119, beginning with verse 18. And if you know it, you can say along with me. If you don't, that's okay too. Open our eyes, O Holy One, our God, that we may see wondrous things in your Torah. For we are but strangers in the earth. Do not hide your commandments from us. Our souls cry out for your judgments at all times. How can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your Torah. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man with his household came with Yaakov, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. All those who were descendants of Yaakov were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful, and they increased abundantly, and they multiplied, and they grew exceedingly mighty, and the land of Egypt was filled with them. But there arose a new king over Egypt, who knew not Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. And if it happen in the event of war, they also join with our enemies and fight against us, and even so go up from the land. And therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pitom and Raamses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and you see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, you are to kill him. But if it is a daughter, you may let it live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they saved the male children alive. And so the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. For they are lively, and they give birth before the midwives come to them." And therefore God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. And so Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you are to cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive." Chapter 2, verse 1, "And a man of the house of Levi went out, and he took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a beautiful child, a tovah, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of the bulrushes for him, and she daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and she laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sisters stood afar off to know what would be done with him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. She had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take the child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the women took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moshe, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." Amen. You may be seated. Is this any way to build a nation? You bet it is. We're not building a nation around a piece of geography or a shared ideology. The Holy One doesn't build a nation that way. Human beings build nations that way. The Holy One, the creator of the universe, builds a nation around a promise to a bloodline and to a redemptive story, to a grand scheme and a grand testimony of redemption that will honor him and honor creation and change the face of the world. So I love the way the story starts. Let's talk a little bit about it. The sons of Israel are listed. The names of the 12 sons are spelled out. And then they are mentioned no more. That was the past. That was the time when we had a group of people all trying to operate in what they thought was right in their own eyes. That season, we came out of that, but that's not where this story ends. And so we begin to enter this strange thing. These are the names. It starts out Ele ha-Shemot. These are the names. And, of course, I mentioned earlier that names in Hebrew don't mean what you think they do in English. English just gives you just the label itself, just the name itself. That's why people fixate. People in different movements will fixate on a certain name, either for the Holy One or for their own people. They'll label themselves. They'll label their movement. They fixate on names as labels, as opposed to prophetic callings, as opposed to empowerments, as opposed to divine energy. And so we have this idea, and we're going to see this fascinating thing take place in this book. It's the book in Hebrew called Shemot, names, or Shems. And this idea is we're going to see who is not named, who is not even given a label. Pharaoh. The Pharaoh, we don't even know. I mean, there's speculation as to which Pharaoh this was, depending on what time frame you think this was. But we are never told his name. It's strange how the Holy One blots out his name. It's not just Pharaoh. We think he's the big villain of the story. Unfortunately, he's really not the villain of the story. It's us, the villain of the real story. The real story is the villain in us. The villain of mankind's fall. That's the real villain. And so the Pharaoh is not ever named. But Shiphrah and Puah, two midwives, who we know nothing else about, their stories told and their names. You see how the Holy One looks at things different than we do? We would think of all things we should give the name. We should tell the name. We want to know the name of the Pharaoh. But we don't really care about Shiphrah and Puah. But the Holy One does. The Holy One knows the forgotten ones, the ones who are really the movers and shakers, the ones who really cause things to happen upon the earth, the ones who really cooperate and labor with deliverance. He knows them. You know, he doesn't ever even tell us the name of Pharaoh's daughter. I mean, I know in Hebrew legend, I go through that process with you, but not in the Torah. He never even mentions her name. He just says the daughter of Pharaoh. She's pretty important, right, to us, the way we look at things. We think those names are important. I can throw out a few names right now you think are important. The Holy One says that's not who's important. The position they hold is not important. The title they carry is not important. What's important are the Shiphrahs and the Puahs. What's important are the babies that are being born and that are tov. What's important are the hopes and the and the plans and the schemes that I have for individual households and families and bloodlines. That's what's important, and you're looking at all the stuff you're putting on the news. You're seeing on the news. You see these loudmouth crows and these blue jays out there squawking and strutting and doing their thing, and you don't realize that they're not the story. The sparrow is the story. Well, so we have this fascinating thing about the names. And then we see that a king arose. This is every parsha of Torah is prophetic for what happened in the week of it. It's assigned to. A king arose in Egypt who knew not Joseph. Okay? A king arose in the land of bondage, in the world's viewpoint of where power lies. A king arose in this week who doesn't understand the Messianic promise, who doesn't understand that bones in Egypt will rise, that yes, these bones will live, that these bones will arise and they will come together, bone unto bone, and they will have the breath of the Holy One raised upon them, and they will have sinew and flesh put upon them. They will be raised up a mighty army, a mighty nation under the Holy One. But the king who knows not Joseph has no idea. He thinks he's strutting around. He thinks he has power. He thinks he controls the universe. And only us, when we're fools, believe that he's right. When we forget we're the sparrow, he's the crow. Now, this is the challenge that we have. Okay, so this king arises who know not Joseph. It's sort of strange because you see the sages look at this and they shake their heads and says, how could that be? Egypt only exists for one reason. Egypt only survived the famine for one reason. Do you know what the reason is? His name was Joseph. This should be ingrained in the eternal history of the nation of Egypt. There should never arise a king in Egypt who knows not Joseph, because Joseph is the story. If Joseph had not arisen, if Joseph had not been brought as a slave into that nation, if Joseph had not come, if Joseph had not been honorable into his calling, if he had not stayed faithful, if he had not been diligent with his work, if he had not been kind and compassionate and loving and yet wise and administrative and self-controlled, there would not be an Egypt, and there would not be this king. And so when the king arises in Egypt, the sages say, how could it be? Because he rewrote history. Because he redefined the history of his nation and of the world. And he redefined what was important. And so this is what happens when you see a nation redefining their own history. You will get a king eventually who knows not the redemptive plan, knows not the redemptive process, knows not the redemptive history, may have heard it somewhere, but doesn't take it to heart, and believe it's really relevant for today, and believe he is in control. And he struts like a crow or a jay, and he squawks, and he threatens, and he tries to intimidate, and he also will be chased away by the sparrows eventually. So we have this king arises who knows not Joseph, and it's prophetic of what's going on in our world today, and so are the rest of the part of the story. But even while that's going on, the Holy One is raising up a Redeemer. The Holy One is making and putting in operation behind the scenes where nobody's looking a redemptive plan, a Redeemer that will step forth in the right moment in time. And it will be a long process, but it will be a quick process when the time comes to see it, the redemption actually come. So, all right. We have then the king who knows not Egypt looks at Bnei Israel. It's funny because he actually coins a phrase. Bnei Israel. That has never before been heard upon the face of the earth. Bnei Israel. The nation of the sons and the children of Israel. He sees something and he doesn't know what he sees, and so he's afraid of it. He sees a bunch of families who were like Abraham or Isaac and Jacob, and they had interactions, individual things, and they all want to do what was right in their own eyes. But he sees them and says, there's something more. They're scary. They're frightening. And so he sees them as, and he calls them Bnei Israel, the nation of the children of Israel. And boy, he's right about a few things. That's about the only thing he's right about. He's right. This is a nation he should be afraid of, but not for the reason he thinks. He says, well, they may join with our enemies. These are the best friends you could ever have. They're here to bless you, like Joseph. They're here to provide discipline and wisdom and compassion and guidance. They're here to model the righteousness of the Holy One to you. They're not your enemies, but you think they are because you can't see how valuable it would be to have that model and that imagery and the blessing of the Holy One upon your household. And so we have this picture of the king saying, these people are scary. They're Bnei Israel. We must do something. We must do something. And so they begin to tighten the noose, and they begin to do things. And it says that, that they made their lives rigor. Made their lives full of rigor. They took them, and at one point it says that they were spread throughout the nation. They put on work forces, work details. They were given jobs to do. Now, when they said he built Pithom and Ramses, again, when I mentioned what the sages say, please don't misunderstand. I'm not telling you these are uncontrovertible facts. I'm just telling you to get a picture, to give you an imagery of the story. The sages say that every day when the Hebrews were sent out into Pithom or to Ramses, these two store cities, and they worked all day. They worked from daylight till dark, building a part of the cities according to the plan they were given. And as soon as the sun went down and they couldn't work anymore, they went back to their camps exhausted, broken, and the Egyptians went in and they tore down everything they'd made that day. So that the next day when the Hebrews arrived and saw there was nothing but rubble where they had just built everything the day before, now they had not only to remove the rubble, they still had to build back in what was according to the pattern. And so by feudal labor, oppression, we can't win. We can't ever win. We're getting further and further behind. We're losing ground. That was sort of the mindset. Make it so hard on them and destroy their will, destroy their sense of purpose and meaning in life. And that was sort of the imagery. Make it rigorous and increase the burdens. And we're going to see how that plays its way out. And that's what you can expect. That's what's happening in the world, in our secular world today. They are going to keep increasing the burdens. They'll make it harder and harder for us to feel like we're accomplishing anything. And that's all part of the plan as well. Don't get too angry. Don't get too offended. Don't get too self-righteous up in your attitudes. Don't say, go out. Don't try to play crow. Don't try to play Jay. You're a sparrow. Learn how to stay in sparrow mode. Be wise. Be calm. Understand who watches over the sparrow. Now, that's the process that we're going to learn how to be disciplined in the process of wanting to act like crows and say, you can't do this to us. This is not fair. This is not right. The Holy One would say, you need to learn how to be a sparrow. You need to learn how to operate. And this is your ecosystem, but you have to treat it right. Now, we are... the king arises who knows not Yosef. He imposes all these... historically, they're called pogroms, measures taken by government to put the pressure on Bnei Israel. But the strange thing about it is, you notice that he kept saying, kill the male, keep the female. Another part of the secular society will tell you maleness is toxic, particularly maleness connected to the creator of the universe. So you see what's happening. Maleness is the problem. Masculinity is the problem. Therefore, women are superior. Women are you can use women, you can manipulate women, but you can't manipulate men. So therefore, destroy the men, destroy the male population. So he focuses on the male child. Book of Revelation kind of pictures this whole picture taking place. Chapter 12, and the woman clothed with the sun, with the stars underneath her feet. The imagery appears, the sign of the Son of Man appears in the heavens. And when this takes place, the woman is ready to give birth. The woman clothed is ready to give birth. Clothed in light is ready to give birth. And beneath her is the adversary. The adversary waits. This great crocodile, the great serpent, waits for her to destroy the what? The male child. And so everything you see in your society that denigrates the male. I'm not saying he's perfect. By heavens means no. But I will tell you this. When you see your society telling you that the male is the problem and their maleness is a curse, then you understand we have entered into this realm. And now it's time for us to not just to stand against it in a sense of political structure or that process, to learn to appreciate and value the male. To show the male and encourage and inspire the male to be who he's created to be. As we've talked about in this building, the magi, the masculinity as God intended. To encourage our sons, to encourage our husbands if we have them, our fathers, to encourage the young men of our community that you were made for more than this. You are not the curse of society. You are not something to be scoffed at or laughed at. You're not something to be disposed of and thrown away. You instead are the seal of the promise of the creator of the universe. Arise and be who you were created to be. So this issue of the maleness, sectioning out the maleness. I hope you can see what's happening in Western culture. I don't know about South African culture or the culture in the Philippines or what is. I'm not trying to encourage you to patriarchy or some sort of male domination. What I am trying to tell you is you're being lied to, you're being deceived, you're being caught up in a great deception in the world if you're buying into any layer or level. If you're throwing sarcasm toward the male, the Homer Simpson process, or all the things that you're seeing that in the world are leading you to this realm of male hatred. And male hatred comes from one source, and it is the source of the adversary. It is the source of the Pharaoh who wants to destroy Bnei Israel. Well, I hope you get that. Now, the other aspect of we're going to see what he does is he says, now, I want you to, first of all, I want you to kill the male babies. I want you to not value every human life. I want you to see life as disposable for your own convenience. Human life births. If it's a male, you choose which ones you kill. You choose, some of them are dispensable. And only the ones that we tell you to keep, you keep. I hope you can see that taking place. And that whole movement of the secular world. That life is disposable, dispensable, that a human infant, an embryo, if you want, whatever label you want to phrase to it, I don't care. If it is a human cell structure of life, the Holy One says, no, you do not do that. And it will be on your hands. It will be on your feet. It will be on your heart. It will be on your life. Blood will yield blood. Whatever you sow, you will reap. There will be blood in your water. And there will be creatures coming forth from your swamp. He who has an ear, let him hear. Now, this challenge of learning the value of individual life. And so what happens is we have one woman whose name is not given to us yet. Yocheved is her real name, but we're not told who she is. She's just a woman of Levi, of the tribe of Levi. She marries this male of Levi. They go out, and we don't told either one of them's names. Names. Very important in the book. Yep, but they do one thing, and she sees that the child is told. If you're not telling your son, your daughter, your husband, you're tov, you're good. You're a fountain of goodness in the earth. You're a spring issuing forth with goodness. If you're not seeing them as that, if you're not acting toward them as that, how can they possibly ever become it? How can they possibly do it if you're telling them how bad men are, and then if you're telling them their life really is important because it's only the female's life that's important. The queen bee and the drones are just to be done away with. If you're telling them these sorts of things, do you understand how we're going to get to the society breaking down the way this does? And so he says, okay, now you kill the male babies, and then we have these strange midwives, Puah, Shiphrah and Puah, and they simply don't do it. Why? What moves Shiphrah and Puah? I'll let you decide that. What would move you? To defy the totally cruel, totally against the plan of God decree of a powerful leader like Pharaoh, the most powerful man in the earth. What would it take to cause you to say, I will not do that? Under what circumstances would you stand? Not for your political purposes, not for your moralistic purposes, not because of what you think is right or wrong. What would be so foreign to the plan of God and your purpose on earth that you would stand up and say, I will not do that, or at least find some way where you don't have to do it? That's your challenge. It is a challenge that you will need to face. I want you to be aware of that. There will be a battle you will need to fight. And you will need to use wisdom when you fight it. Don't use the tools of the adversary. Don't use the tools of the flesh. Don't use the weapons of this fleshly warfare. You don't become a crow. Learn how to use the weapons of the Spirit and learn how to do things that are necessary. And so we have Shiphrah and Puah stand up, and they frustrate the plan of the Pharaoh to kill all the male babies. So the male baby decides, the Pharaoh finds a way, the adversary finds a way around the Shiphrah and Puah protocol. He says, everybody, not just a few midwives, this is the order of everybody. You must take every male child of the Hebrews and throw them in the Nile. Infanticide, living babies. These are not babies on the womb. This is after birth. Well after, you take every male child. It doesn't matter how old they are, I guess, at this stage. We didn't tell you to go till they're 12, till they're 14. Take these male babies, these male children, and there's no real word for babies, just children. Take these male children in and throw them in the Nile. And then we have Yocheved. We have Yocheved and the mother and the baby, and she has the baby, and the baby is tov. We see in beautiful. It's just beautiful in English, mostly. But the Hebrew is tov, and you know what tov means. Tov is we would usually translate it as good, but it's so much more than just good in the sense of morality. Why is he good? He's good because he's a fountain of great things. She sees potential for wonderful things, glory in him. She sees him as good. She does not see him as refuse. She does not see him as contraband. She does not see him as useless. She does not see him as rubble, as even a threat. She sees to her own well-being. She sees him as the fountain of good. And so she takes a basket. It's called an aron. It's not called a teva. A teva is what Noah had. That kind of ark. We see it in English. It looks like ark, but in Hebrew it's aron, and it's a vessel, and it's not coated with kafar like the ark is. It's coated with asphalt and pitch. It's coated with something else, different substances. And she puts the baby in the ark, the aron. And we're going to see this word aron later. That's going to be the Ark of the Covenant. That's not going to be like the teva. It's going to be the Ark of the Covenant. And we'll see. And she puts him in this, and she sends him on its way. And here's little Miriam, the daughter, the sister, big sister, running, and you see her running alongside. Doesn't say she ran, but somehow she got from one place to another. And here's this baby. Here's this contraband. Here's this illegal child. Here is this cursed being floating on the Nile River into the belly of the beast, to Pharaoh's palace. Isn't it strange how the Holy One works? He floats this child into the belly of the one who will be the beast. And he's the beast's father. The real beast is yet to come. And so here we go. He floats him into the belly of the beast, and the deliverance is going to begin to be wrought from the belly of the beast. Understand, don't panic, don't fear, don't be afraid. The deliverance will come from the very belly of the beast. Now that process will take place, and so you see the young child growing up, and you see how he is being given the opportunity to have a Hebrew heritage because his mother weans him for wages. She actually, it's part of the whole story is, she's a slave that has to work for you for nothing. But I'm going to turn things around where you pay her to do what she would illegally have to do. Now you see how the Holy One, that's why I tell you, don't buy into the lies. Don't buy into the crow squawk. The crow squawk of this world is so much. The Holy One says, I'll take the very things they intended for evil for you, and I'll turn them into good. And I will take their money and pay you to do what they said was illegal. That's why we fall in love with this God. That's why we fall totally head over heels in passionate love for Him. Why we trust Him. Why we want Him to live in us. Why we want to become His servants. But more than His servants, His friends. We want to host Him. We want to make Him part of us because He can do stuff like that. And do it in ways that don't even involve us being perfect in any way, shape, or imagination. Isn't that pretty cool? And so I'm gonna move forward. We don't have much time. I want to move forward to the burning bush. Can we talk about the burning bush, man? Because eventually, what's going to happen? I guess I should set a little preview. I told you the Holy One could do this without us being perfect. In the flesh, sometimes the people God's going to use have the biggest problems. If you think of Moshe as some sort of a hero when he killed an Egyptian, then you'll think somebody's a hero when they kill the adversary in your world. There's so many stories here I could tell you, and so many bad endings that I could tell you about. But what happens is when Moshe gets old enough to go out and recognize he's connecting himself with his Hebrew heritage rather than all the things he learned in the courts of Pharaoh, when he sees an Egyptian striking a Hebrew, and I know you've seen movies, and I know you think you know what happened, and I know you think it was a taskmaster, I know you think he was beating this slave, but just so you know, that's not what the text actually says. The text just says he was an Egyptian, and the Hebrew was a Hebrew, and the Egyptian struck the Hebrew. Now, I know it blows your mind that maybe this isn't what you thought it was. Maybe this is just a matter of ethnic dispute. Maybe this is just a matter of I don't like your attitude, or I don't like your ways, or I don't like your behavior. Maybe this is just I don't like your face. We don't know what it was. Don't think you do. It doesn't really matter what it was. What we have is people disagree all the time, and people strike each other all the time. How will you respond to that? And so what Moshe does, he sees it, and he immediately takes a side. He doesn't know the story. He doesn't know the reason. He doesn't know how far this is going to go. He chooses to judge on the spot and make a decision, and then to premeditate a murder. He looked this way, and he looked that way to make sure no one is looking. Now, in any court of law in the United States of America or any country of this union, that is called premeditation. That is murder one, if you follow it with the act. And that's what happened next. And then he strikes the Egyptian, and then he has the third aspect of it, which he buries his body in the sand where nobody, he thinks, can see the sand, the body. So he, after the fact, he premeditates. He slays the Egyptian under his own concept of what's right and wrong based upon what he thinks, his own predispositions, maybe his own ethnicity issues that he's got going on, his own hatred of the Egyptian for what they're doing to the Hebrews. He's bringing everybody else's squabble into this particular situation and assuming, boy, have you ever seen that this week, okay? And now, so he does it, and of course, you know, the next thing happens. The next day he goes out, and he tries to do the same thing between two Hebrews. Two Hebrews are arguing with each other. I don't know what about. Theology, I don't know. How to do a task in Pithom. I don't know what they're arguing about, but Moshe goes in there, and he's now got all this puffed up crow nature in him. So he comes in there, and he starts telling him, why are you striking your fellow Hebrew? And the guy says, who appointed you judge and ruler over us? It's a good question. Nobody had yet. Nobody had yet. And that man could not be appointed judge and ruler. Not the crow man that was out there. And so that's why he wound up spending 40 years on the backside of the wilderness. And now we have 40 years of being a shepherd in somebody else's pasture, somebody else's flock. 40 years of having nothing. 40 years of serving some other man who didn't even seem to follow any rhyme or reason, just a nomad out in the wilderness, a sheik of Midian. And one day, he's out tending the sheep on the backside of the desert. There ain't much grass or greenery to feed them out there, but there's something somewhere. So he has to go as far in the reaches of the desert as he possibly can and take the sheep out there to get them some greenery, some grass, whatever. I know you've seen the movies and seen the sheep wandering off. We don't know if that's what happened or not. But what we do know is this. What we do know is that at some point, as he's making this trek out there, the Holy One is hiding behind a bush. The creator of the universe, and I say that with tongue in cheek, because he is in the bush, all in the bush, and he is manifesting himself in the bush, and he is causing this bush, this thorn bush, bush of thorns. He's causing it to be a flame, but yet not be consumed. He's causing fire to come out of it. And so Moshe sees the strange sight, and most of us would say, that's interesting, and move on. But something about Moshe was curious. He says, I will turn aside. I will leave the path I'm on. I will leave the mindset that I have. I will leave my own past and my own history of behaving and try to find something that I didn't understand and move forward, go in a deeper level. So he leaves the path he is on. He turns aside. Oh, this in Hebrew is shuv, making a shuving, a turning. He makes a turn, and he goes to the mount, to the fire where the fire is burning, and out of that fire, see, it's not about the fire. It's not about the phenomenon. It's not about the miracle. It's about the voice. It's about the one who speaks. I spent a few minutes last week in our discussions of Parsha Vayikhi telling you my stories of the voice. I won't go through and repeat the stories. I hope you go back and watch the video again if you need to catch that part of it. The voice of the creator of the universe is our center of gravity of life. If it's not, we've got problems. We'll always have problems. If we have a focus, a desire, if our passions are aroused up and we let them go and we let our emotions get all caught up in something besides the voice of the creator of the universe and let something else be our motivator, something else be our inspiration, we will be in great trouble. But if we let him be our center of gravity, his voice, and what he says, the words out of his mouth, and the personality of who is speaking to us, the power of that personality, that will begin to change us from crows back into sparrows like we belong and should be in the beginning. So he speaks to Moshe and he says, Moshe, Moshe, he knows your name. He knows the name that Pharaoh's daughter, who's not named, gave you. He knows what they call you. He knows the nicknames. He knows the labels that either you have taken on yourself or that other people have put on you. He knows all your labels. He knows all your names. He knows all your nicknames. He knows all those things that they say about you or that you think about yourself. He knows all that, but he sees something different. And so he says, Moshe, Moshe. And he says, what does Moshe say? One word, one Hebrew word. Hineni. It wasn't because he was just saying, here, present. He wasn't a kid reporting to his principal. I've told you what Hineni means. I've given you the picture of Hineni. Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Yosef. Hineni is a complete surrender to the voice, a complete abandonment of self, a complete denial of my own will, my own purpose, my own plan, my own thoughts of who I am. Hineni. Same from Yeshua in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will be done, but yours be done. This is that Hineni sense. And so Moshe has found a certain sweet spot. That's your sweet spot too. The Hineni response. Not the, but this is not right response. Not the crow squawk. The Hineni, I am yours to do your will, at your disposal, at your service, for your glory. That is the Hineni call. So Moshe says that. It's like, you turned aside from your own way. You spoke Hineni with all your heart. Now he says, now I want you to do something. One more test, the third test of the process. First, will you turn aside from what you're doing? Or are you going to continue your own way no matter what? Second issue, second test is, will you surrender your own self-will and surrender to do the will of the Father? The third test is, now take your shoes off. Take off your sandals, because the place where you are standing, not the place where this fire is burning, the place where you are standing is about to become holy ground. Are you willing to take off the pathway, the clothing, the garments that you're personally carrying, the things that you think are preparing you for what you're about to do, the education, the training, the doctrine, the theology? Are you ready to take off all that, put aside your shoes, and step into a place of holiness, the veil, behind the veil that separates the realms? Are you willing to come into my realm and live with me and walk according to my ways? Or are you going to stay living according to the ways of the culture and the world? Which one are you on? It's the third test before he ever gets any instructions about what to do. And then he says something so strange, so crazy. He says, I will send you to Pharaoh. And you will say to him, Shalach ami, send my people out. And he will not let you go. He will not let them go until I work on him with a mighty, powerful hand and an outstretched arm and show him great signs, great wonders. and then he will surely send you out. And Moshe has to process through, as most of us would at that particular stage. I'll let you look for it on your own. There are basically 5 different dodges, or 5 different questions that Moshe throws at him. 5 different positions that Moshe says, and he has to overcome. This is part of the things within, the bondage within, that each one of us has to deal with. What are your 5 layers of bondage you need to talk through with the Holy One, before you'll finally say, okay, I said I was going to go. I said I would do your will. I had to process through every argument. That's why I shouldn't do your will, but I'm going to go and do your will. Well, we're out of time. Our 80 minutes around the Torah for the week is over. So I'm going to say goodbye to all my friends across the world and who are tuning in to this message here, or we'll see it later on YouTube. I thank you for joining us. I thank you for visiting with the Biblical Lifestyle Center and us today. We are going to join together. We are going to become a one nation, Am B'nai Israel, that will serve the King. We are going to raise up from all corners of the earth and all ethnicities and all tribes and tongues. And we will rise up unto him to be his servants and to be moving and flowing with his words, being a host for his presence in this world and a model to the nations. Thank you for being part of that. Thank you for being willing to turn aside this morning and listen. I pray that as you now spend the rest of the day behind the veil of intimacy of the Sabbath, the 7th day, this holiness place where we enter into and become refreshed and restored, that your day will be transformational, that you will hear the voice of the Creator of the universe over and over again, speaking deep into your soul. He knows your name. He knows what you're called. He knows who you think you are. And he knows what you're here on earth to do and be. If you have a chance, leave your name and your location, and we'll pray for you. Amen. See you next week.